This is Front Up on Geno TV. I'm Dan Drake, and our guest today is CatherinStover, here in her capacity as the sponsor of several articles in the town meeting warrant for the 2013 annual town meeting. So I'd like to talk about those. Welcome.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll start with Article 64, which is the article concerning funeral establishments, as you use the term, if I may, because I think that's really important. And I'd like to go through the specifics of it in a minute, but first, let's talk conceptually. What's going on here? There's been a lot of press in the paper about the possibility of the Lewis Funeral Home closing down at some point. And what is...
I think it's a reality. It's not a matter of if they'll do it. They are going to do it at some point. And I think we need to have a plan in place for what's going to happen, you know, with funeral service. I mean, not just having the funerals and where to have them, but who's going to take custody of the body? Who's going to prepare the body for burial or cremation or funeralization? If there's an accident, you know, who's going to take charge of that body? If there's no funeral service here, we have to bring somebody from off island. The medical examiner has to bring a van down to pick up an accident case or a sudden death at home or something, unattended death. And right now the Lewises, you know, are doing that. They are removing the body and taking care of sending it off to the medical examiner, sending it to the crematory or whatever. So in the long term, we need to have something in place. And
are you aware? I know you're aware that the fact that most funeral homes have been rolled up into big chains.
Oh, of course, SCI, absolutely. And
has that ever been an option here in Nantucket to have one of these chains come in and provide the service?
They could, and your minimum cost will be at least $10,000 for a funeral, for a bare bones funeral. And we have basically the cheapest funerals around. People might not believe that, but places with a $10 ice cream cone, you get a $6,000 bare bones funeral. And the Lewis family has been very generous. They've really subsidized funerals here for at least 30 years. They keep selling off bits of their property to keep it open. They don't go after people. They have an enormous amount of receivables, and they don't chase people. They don't dun people for it. They kind of hope people will pay at some point, but you know, and people here aren't all rich. They do what they can, and we need to have something that will be affordable, but also that we'll be in control of. Somebody like SCI comes in and they say, "Oh, well, you know, it's going to cost us. We're going to have 2 funeral directors here, which basically we should have anyway. We'll have to have a place to put them. Going to have rolling stock. You're going to have all kinds of equipment on hand, and it's going to cost a lot of money." They are so large that they can afford to buy places, but if it isn't going to pay them, they're not going to bother. And the funeral home on Union Street has been there for, I don't know how long, but at least 100 years. And somebody coming in to buy that is not going to pay what the business is worth and not going to pay what the real estate is worth. They're going to want the funeral home as the real estate and not as a funeral home.
What are the obstacles to sort of accomplishing a transition? Presumably there's some that are enumerated in your technical
in the
home
second
rule
article,
petition.
yes.
Such as, you know, changing the ownership provisions, allowing certain classes of funeral directors to be owners of the business, allowing a funeral establishment to operate over several different locations. I suppose that means a crematory in one place.
You could have a crematory
bombing facility somewhere else
on one side of the wall, and then the crematory on the other. Sure, and then the funeral home itself can be anywhere on the island. You can have a chapel there, or you don't have to have a chapel there. You can do funerals in churches. You can do
does
them.
state law require that there be a chapel?
Yes,
as part of
which is why I have it in the
I assume
exemption.
That was the case, but I wanted to...
And I am also a licensed funeral director.
Right.
But I am not looking to get back into that business. That ship has sailed for me. But it definitely needs to we need to think about it. We
Right.
really need to think about it.
Do you have a solution in mind, or are you just sort of
Yeah.
chipping around?
This, the Nantucket Life Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we would need to raise about $5 million as an endowment, and that would pay, the interest would pay for the administration of the funeral service, pay for the expenses of a hearse and 2 funeral directors to be on the island, and maybe have a place for them to live.
Why do you need to do this through a town action? Why can't you set it up as a not-for-profit, another not-for-profit?
You could, but I think that the people need to be invested in this. I think once you get outside the control of the people, I think things can go awry. You can't get people to agree on who's going to run it and how many caskets are going to have on display and all this thing. I think as a nonprofit and as a not-for-profit
business.
Yes. And in terms of having a regular board, but it would be people that have a vested interest in Nantucket, not just people that own property or own.
Is there a group of people working with you on this, or is it pretty much you at this point?
Well, it's there are people who are interested in helping, and Mr. Barnes, for one, he's just a great resource. I think there are people that would, if it comes to that. But then again, as with any articles that I bring forward, it's not because I have an emotional investment in it or ownership in them. It's because there's a need. Either people want this and they vote for it, or they don't. So I'm bringing things forward usually because people say, well, you know what, why don't we do this? And I know how to do it. I know how to do the petitions, and if people vote for it, fine. If they don't, that's fine too. At least I know I brought it forward for them, and people then take ownership of it, or they say, nah, we're not interested. And then that's fine. At least I did what I could do.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on that subject of the funeral home before we get on to the other?
Yeah, the funeral business here, service here by the Lewises has been outstanding, and they're very compassionate people, and they have done an amazing job. Mr. Lewis, I don't remember him ever leaving the island. His family has gone on vacation or whatever, but he's here, and he's available, and he serves the community. Yep.
Having worked with him a couple of times, I agree with you.
Yes. Lovely man.
It is. Let's move on to your Articles 49, 50, and 51, which are the charter amendment. I'm going to take them in that order, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
The first one is basically a provision, would change the rules a bit so that, except in really an extraordinary vote of the Board of Selectmen, zoning articles would only be heard at an annual town meeting, not at a special town meeting. What's the rationale for that?
Rationale for that is things get very busy in the wintertime here. People make their money in other trades other than their businesses that they do in the summer. And most people will not make the time to go to a special town meeting unless it impacts them personally. So most of those things are dealt with in the bigger body of the annual town meeting. And I think that things can happen at a special town meeting and just kind of get by people because they don't really know, they don't understand, or they don't take the time to read. And I think the annual town meeting is the place to address these issues.